welcome you to the official podcast of the Fish Wrapper publication, bringing you story content to inspire, encourage, and uplift the soul. It's our hope you find these stories refreshing, thought-provoking, and motivating as you face the challenges of everyday life. So turn us up and tune your ears, and let's get started by jumping right into the story.
The Setness of Theodosia, Part 2, by Lucy Maud Montgomery, read by Ruth Risser. Wesley and Theodosia were only married a short while before a serious disagreement came between them. Wesley got it into his head that he wanted to move west, and Theodosia stubbornly disagreed with the idea. After numerous attempts to persuade her to change her mind, Wesley finally decided he would move west, even if it meant going by himself. The stubborn determination was not foreign to either of them, and they both clung to it, unwilling to bend. With his trunk all packed and loaded, Wesley made one last try to persuade his love to come along, but again, the answer was a firm no. There was no tremor of an eyelash with her. Wesley smiled bitterly and turned away. When the wagon reached the end of the little lane, he turned back and looked for the last time. Through all the years that followed, he carried with him the picture of his wife as he saw her then, standing amid the airy shadows and wavering golden lights of the morning, the wind blowing her skirt about her feet and ruffling the locks of her bright hair into a delicate golden cloud. Then the wagon disappeared around a curve in the road, and Theodosia turned and went back into her desolate home. For a time there was a great buzz of gossip over the affair. People wondered over it. Old Jim Parmalee understood better than the others. When he met Theodosia, he looked at her with a curious twinkle in his keen old eyes.
"Looks as if a man could bend her any way he'd mind to, doesn't she?" he said. "Looks is deceiving. It'll come out in her face by and by. She's too young yet, but it's there. It does seem unnatural to see a woman so stubborn. You'd kinder look for it more in a man."
Wesley wrote a brief letter to Theodosia when he reached his destination. He said he was well and was looking about for the best place to settle. He liked the country fine. He was at a place called Red Butte and guessed he'd locate there. 2 weeks later, he wrote again. He had taken up a claim of 300 acres. Green and Carey had done the same. They were his nearest neighbors and were 3 miles away. He had built a little shack, was learning to cook his own meals, and was very busy. He thought the country was a grand one and the prospects good. Theodosia answered his letter and told him all the Heatherton news. She signed herself Theodosia Brooke, but otherwise there was nothing in the letter to indicate that it was written by a wife to her husband. At the end of a year, Wesley wrote and once more asked her to move out to him. He was getting on well and was sure she would like the place. It was a little rough, to be sure, but time would improve that.
"Won't you let bygones be bygones, Theodosia," he wrote, "and come out to me? Do, my dear wife."
Theodosia wrote back, refusing to go. She never got any reply, nor did she write again. People had given up talking about the matter and asking Theodosia when she was going out to Wes. Heatherton had grown used to the chronic scandal within its decorous borders. Theodosia never spoke of her husband to anyone, and it was known that they did not correspond. She took her youngest sister to live with her. She had her garden and hens and a cow. The farm brought her enough to live on, and she was always busy. When 15 years had gone by, there were naturally some changes in Heatherton, sleepy and unprogressive as it was. Most of the old people were in the little hillside burying ground that fronted the sunrise. Old Jim Parmalee was there, with his recollections of 4 generations. Men and women who had been in their prime when Wesley went away were now old, and the children were grown up and married. Theodosia was 35 and was nothing like the slim, dimpled girl who had stood on the porch steps and watched her husband drive away that morning 15 years ago. She was stout and comely. The auburn hair was darker and arched away from her face in smooth, shining waves instead of the old-time curls. Her face was unlined and fresh-colored. But no woman could live in subjection to her own unbending will for so many years and not show it. Nobody, looking at Theodosia now, would have found it hard to believe that a woman with such a determined, immovable face could stick to a course of conduct in defiance of circumstances. Wesley Brooke was almost forgotten. People knew, through correspondence of Green and Carey, that he had prospered and grown rich. The curious old story had crystallized into accepted history. A life may go on without ripple or disturbance for so many years that it may seem to have settled into a lasting calm. Then a sudden wind of passion may sweep over it and leave behind a wake of tempestuous waters. Such a time came at last to Theodosia. One day in August, Mrs. Emery Merritt dropped in. Emery Merritt's sister was Ogden Green's wife, and the Merritts kept up an occasional correspondence with her. Hence, Cecilia Merritt always knew what was to be known about Wesley Brooke, and always told Theodosia because she had never been expressly forbidden to do so. Today she was secretly wondering if the news she brought would have any effect whatever on Theodosia's impassive calm. "Do you know, Dosia, Wesley's real sick? In fact, Phoebe Green says they have very poor hopes of him. He was kind of ailing all spring, it seems, and about a month ago he was took down with some kind of fever. Phoebe says they have a hired nurse from the nearest town and a good doctor, but she reckons he won't get over it." Cecilia Merritt was caught off guard by the half-gasp, half-cry from Theodosia. "My Dosia, you ain't going to faint? I didn't suppose you care. You never seem to care." "Did you say," asked Theodosia thickly, "that Wesley was sick? Dying?" "Well, that's what Phoebe implied," said Cecilia. "Dosia Brooke, I never could make you out, and I never expect to. I guess only the Lord who made you can translate you." Theodosia stood up. The sun was getting low, and the valley beneath them, ripening to harvest, was like a river of gold. She folded up her sewing with a steady hand. "It's 5 o'clock, so I'll ask you to excuse me, Cecilia. I have a good deal to attend to. You can ask Emery if he'll drive me to the station in the morning. I'm going out to Wes." "Well, my," said Cecilia Merritt feebly, as she tied on her sunbonnet. She got up and went home in a daze.
We hope you've been enjoying the story. We will continue in just a moment. We want to remind you that the Fish Wrapper is available by subscription. Each issue of the Fish Wrapper is jam-packed with story content, amazing recipes, games, jokes, and much, much more. Our readers never want to miss an issue. And you can order yours today by visiting thefishwrapperonline.com or by calling 717-400-FISH. That number again is 717-400-FISH. Now let's return and finish the story.
Theodosia packed her trunk and worked all night, dry-eyed, with agony and fear tearing at her heart. The iron will had snapped at last, like a broken reed, and fierce self-condemnation seized on her. "I've been a heartless woman," she moaned. A week from that day, Theodosia climbed down from the dusty stage that had brought her from the station over the prairies to the unpretentious little house where Wesley Brooke lived. A young girl, so like what Ogden Green's wife had been 15 years before that, Theodosia involuntarily exclaimed, "Phoebe," came to the door. Beyond her, Theodosia saw the white-capped nurse. Her voice trembled. Does Wesley Brooke live here?" The girl nodded. "Yes, but he's very ill at present. Nobody is allowed to see him." Theodosia put up her hand and loosened her bonnet strings as if they were choking her. She had been sick with the fear that Wesley would be dead before she got to him. The relief was almost overwhelming. "But I must see him!" she cried hysterically. She, the calm, easygoing Dosia, hysterical. "I am his wife, and oh, if he had died before I got here!" The nurse came forward. "In that case, I suppose you must," she conceded. "But he does not expect you. I must prepare him for the surprise." She turned to the door of a room opening off the kitchen, but Theodosia, who had hardly heard her, was before her. She was inside the room before the nurse could prevent her. Then she stood, afraid and trembling, her eyes searching the dim apartment. When they fell on the occupant of the bed, Theodosia started in bitter surprise. All unconsciously, she had been expecting to find Wesley as he had been when they parted. Could this gaunt, haggard creature with the unkept beard and prematurely gray hair and the hollow, beseeching eyes be the ruddy, boyish-faced husband of her youth? She gave a choking cry of pain and shame, and the sick man turned his head. Their eyes met. Amazement, incredulity, hope, dread, all flashed in succession over Wesley Brooke's lined face. He feebly raised himself up.
"Dosia,"
he murmured. Theodosia staggered across the room and fell on her knees by the bed. She clasped his head to hers and kissed him again and again. "Oh, Wes, can you forgive me? I've been a heartless, stubborn woman, and I've spoiled our lives. Forgive me." He held his thin, trembling arms around her and searched her face with his eyes.
"Dosia, when did you come? Did you know I was sick?"
"Wes, I can't talk till you say you've forgiven me."
"Oh, Dosia, you have just as much to forgive. We were both too set. I should have been more considerate."
"Just say, 'I forgive you, Dosia,'" she entreated.
"I forgive you, Dosia,"
he said gently.
"And oh, it's so good to see you once more, darling. There hasn't been an hour since I left you that I haven't longed for your sweet face. If I had thought you really cared, I'd have gone back. But I thought you didn't. It broke my heart. You did, though, didn't you?"
"Oh, yes, she said, holding him more closely, with her tears falling. When the young doctor from Red Butte came that evening, he found a great improvement in his patient. Joy and happiness, those world-old physicians, had done what drugs and medicines had failed to do.
"I'm going to get better, Doc,"
said Wesley.
"My wife has come, and she's going to stay. You didn't know I was married, did you? I'll tell you the story sometime. I proposed going back east, but Dosia says she'd rather stay here. I'm the happiest man in Red Butte, Doc."
He squeezed Theodosia's hand as he had used to do long ago in Heatherton Church, and Dosia smiled down at him. There were no dimples now, but her smile was very sweet. The ghostly finger of old Henry Ford, pointing down through the generations, had lost its power to brand with its curse the life of these, his descendants. Wesley and Theodosia had joined hands with their long-lost happiness, brought on by a willingness to forgive. The end.
We hope that you enjoyed this story and will join us again soon when we unravel another adventure from the pages of the Fish Wrapper. We encourage you to like and subscribe to this podcast, ensuring that you never miss a new episode. See you again soon, and may our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ guide you.